Hello, I have a really cool story today called the Polar Express. A really cool train on it. It was written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. Here we go. On Christmas Eve many years ago, I lay quietly on my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound. A sound a friend had told me I never hear, the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no Santa, my friend had insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night I did hear the sound, though not through the ringing of bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and I saw a train standing perfectly still in the front of my house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood with the door open of the car. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe and tiptoed downstairs out the door. "All aboard!" the conductor cried out. I ran to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course," was his answer. "This is the Polar Express." I took his outreached hand, and he pulled me aboard. Look at that big train. The train was filled with other children, all in their own pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa, as thick and as rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon, there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through old dark forests where lean wolves roamed the white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we could scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we went along, rolling over peaks through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountain turned into hills, and the hills of snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the great polar ice caps. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." The North Pole, it was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first, we saw no elves. They were gathering at the center of the city, the conductor told us. "This is where Santa will give you the first gift of Christmas." "Who receives the first gift?" we all asked. The conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look," shouted one of the children, "the elves!" Outside, we saw hundreds of elves as our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole. We slowed to a crawl, so the crowds in the streets was Santa's helper. When the Polar Express could go no farther, we stopped and the conductor led us outside. We pressed through the crowd to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They were prancing in haste, ringing the silver bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound, like nothing I had ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and pointed to me. "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into his sleigh. The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" I knew that I could have any gift I could imagine, but the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one of the silver bells from Santa's sleigh. When I asked Santa, he smiled, and he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from the reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood holding the bell high above him and called out, "The first gift of Christmas!" There he is. A clock struck midnight as the elves roared with their approval. Santa handed up the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out to the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled above us all, then disappeared in the cold, dark polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," said one of the children. But the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children and stood in my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas!" he shouted. The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had a name on it. Inside of it was a silver bell. There was a note. "Found this on my seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C." I shook the bell, and it made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I had shaken it, the bell, my parents had not heard a sound. At that moment, my friends could hear the bell, but as the years passed, it fell silent for some of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I have grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all of those who truly believe. And that's our story, The Polar Express.